We can all think of that person who seems to have it all, whether it be the perfect family, the career, the house, the dog. They seem to just really know how to be doing life. And then they surprise you. They zig when you think they're going to zag. When you think their path to success is all laid out, they pull a Barry Sanders and leave right in their prime. For my next guest on Cold Coffee, I sat down with mother of four and former Houston news anchor, Kaitlin Monte, to talk about the power of walking away. I absolutely love the fact that I'm seeing you right now back in studio. Is this your first time being in a studio since working at Fox 26?
It is, I think, my second time, because after I left TV news, I worked in PR, and so I was helping other people get on camera and get their message out and using what I knew to support them. So I worked on some projects where I was behind the scenes, which was fascinatingly fun, and I enjoyed it tremendously, and I still enjoy it to this day.
And so to bring people into the fold, we actually worked together at Fox, and I remember you were killing it. I mean, I would watch you prep for shows. I would watch you take, in the middle of prepping for a show, or for the newscast, you would take an interview with Governor Greg Abbott, and then you would run and prep for the next segment that you might have been working on. And on top of all of that, during that time, you were pregnant. And then you had your baby. And then what happened next?
So I had, was that my first or second pregnancy that you were around?
It was a third.
It was probably with Henry. So, I mean, I went on maternity leave, and then I came back and got back to work. That to me, that was, I always said I'm pregnant, but I'm not any less able. So let me just keep doing it. And I think it was more amazing to other people that I kind of wanted to keep coming back, because I think that's not normal or not what people expect as much now. But I wanted to. And so I just kept going. The work had to get done.
And I think there's so many people that as parents, we leave, we have our kids, we have our babies, and then we come back. What was that like for you? Because you didn't do it just once or twice. You did it 4 times.
It was my norm at that point. We knew we wanted a big family, and I knew that I took my commitment to the job that I had extremely seriously. So I met both at the same level. And for me, excellence is a sort of a core personal value. So if I was going to do one or both of these things, I was going to do both of them as excellent as I could. So there was no other alternative to me. I wanted to do it all. And then it was sort of in the pandemic, as the industry shifted that I was in, that's when I started to have a little bit of an awakening. And then there was a comment from my daughter that really shattered the picture that I had built of what my life was, and made me realize that it wasn't coming together the way that I thought I had built it, or at least not in her perception. She looked at me one day, and she was, kids role play, and so she was pretending to be a daddy. And I was like, why do you always pretend to be daddy? And she goes, well, mommies are never around. And she was like 3 at the time. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I realized that I internally felt like mom, and I identified as mom, but I was not being mom in the way that I wanted mom to present or to show up for her, in the way that she deserved for me to be showing up for her. And everyone's journey is going to be very different. Right. But for me, that was something that hit me really hard. And so I started to think of, what does mom look like? And so when I looked at my career, I said, I've got to find a way for these things to make sense together. If I'm going to continue to do what I'm doing, I have to be able to continue to be mom in the most excellent way that I can. And that's when I started to realize that these two things were not going to fit together for me. And that's when I started to have conversations about, well, then what does that mean? And it ultimately was one of the factors. There were quite a few that added up to it's time to walk away.
And so would you say that was the main factor?
That was a big one. I also think that working in news during the pandemic, it was like having a front row seat to the whole world's trauma. And I got to a point where I realized that I was not able to have the level of impact that I wanted to, because of the nature of the way the business was changing. So I said, all right, maybe instead of watching the world burn or watching it feel like it's falling apart, I wanted to help fix it and to help heal it a little bit. And I found an opportunity that allowed me to go and do that in a more directly impactful way that still leveraged all of my gifts and talents, but allowed me to do it in a way that felt to me more directly impactful, and then fulfilled the need that I had, or the desire I had, to be a more present parent for my kids.
Right. And so what did some of those conversations look like, Kaitlin, when you were coming to making this decision and you are now thinking you're walking away from a very public type job? You are in the public's eye and people expect certain things from you. Mm-hmm. What did some of those conversations look like?
So I think a lot of millennial women, we were told to girl boss, we were told to climb to the top, and then we get there and you look down from this hill and you realize, I don't want to actually be here. I don't actually like this. And I think that's the great awakening that people talk about post-pandemic, because we all got a little bit of this break or this step away, a little bit more connected with family and home. And then I think a lot of us realize, like, I like this and I don't want to feel ashamed to like this. And so when I started to tell people, those who were older, particularly women who were older in leadership roles around me, looked at me, and the comment that I'll never forget was the comment that there was a time when women couldn't have what you have. And that is when I realized that my success wasn't mine. I had gotten to this point, and that was the kind of high-performing people pleaser that so much of what I'd done in my life was to meet the expectations or standards or needs or joy of other people. And that was when I reflected and said, well, what if I threw it all away and built it again? What would a congruent day in my life look like? And it wouldn't involve being away from my kids as much as I'm away right now. And it wouldn't involve having to do X, Y, Z. And so I said, well, how do I get there? I had a therapist that I turned to. I'm a huge believer that if you need to be strong through changes, keep your mind strong. I needed a third neutral party who could be an accountability partner, but also someone to help me organize my thoughts. Even my own husband and my parents, everyone has a perspective of who you are. I'm the only one who's kind of living. We're all each the only one living in our own head.
That's
and
right.
So I knew what I was dealing with. I could brain dump it on her, and she would look at me and say, well, what I'm hearing you say is you already know what you want. You just don't know how to deal with that. And the biggest thing, going back to your question, is the public perception. Mm-hmm. I was so afraid of how it would be perceived, and not afraid in that I was going to keep me from doing it, but it was causing way more anxiety than I needed to carry with me. And that's why ultimately I decided when I left that I would say nothing, because we don't owe an explanation for our existence. Right. And at the time, I was working through enough to sort of reconfigure my world, and I didn't want to feel like I had to present the answer in one concise, beautiful post. You know, so often we have to document these changes. And that's what I was going to ask
you is you did it in such a quiet way. What drove you to do it in such a quiet way? Because again, I was there. I saw it. You were at the peak. I mean, you had, in all of our minds, we can think of that person who has everything. They have the beautiful family. You had the life. I mean, you yourself are absolutely beautiful. You're kind. You had your children. You had what so many people think that they want. And I want to put that caveat, right? Think that they want. And then you very quietly walked away.
I didn't want it to be a debate. I knew that if I posted, even if I said something simple and gracious, everyone was going to have a take, because that's how social media works.
Yes.
It's a hot take market. And so I didn't want to facilitate a discussion because I'd made my decision. And that happened a lot in the personal conversations as well, where people said, well, what about, have you thought about, have you considered, did you talk to your husband? And I learned to say, thank you for thinking about that. We've considered that, and my decision's final. Right. And I didn't have to help other people feel comfortable with it. I knew that there were people who were going to be uncomfortable, because when people come to depend on you, that's going to cause discomfort when they can't anymore. But I also knew they were going to find the next person for my job. The world was going to keep turning. And rather than look at it as, how could I throw this away? What kind of bad person am I to give up something other people would want? So if they want it, then it's yours. Have it. I'm not a bad person for letting someone else get a chance. I had to look at it in that way rather than looking at it as a form of failure. And it wasn't the first time in my life where I had walked away from something that other people told me, how could you? Why would you do that? I had started my career in New York City. Right. And when I said I'm going to move to Houston, they're like, you're going to leave market number one? But to me, what I wanted couldn't be had where I was. And so we left. And I think we are made to feel like our life is going to be defined by sort of other people's measure of our success.
Sure.
And I just simply said, like, the world is too mysterious and weird for this, for me to dislike existence as much as I was disliking the incongruency of my life at the time.
And so what did the aftermath look like? So you have your babies, you leave.
Yeah.
You're out of the limelight.
And it was, it's funny, the first thing that changed was my relationship with money. Because in the job that I was in, I was making good money, but I was terrified to spend it. And I once referenced it to my husband as, I feel like I'm serving time. I knew that this job was bringing something in financially to our family that was beneficial, and I wanted to get as much of it as I could before I burnt out. But here I was at burnout. And so once I no longer felt that pressure, suddenly I didn't feel so afraid to spend money. Because at the time, I hoarded money because I thought every penny I save is another day I don't have to keep doing it. So it's like shortening my time, shortening my sentence. And that's an awful way to feel about your job, and so that was one of the things that changed is I stopped being so anxious about that. And ultimately the biggest change was life got really quiet and I didn't want to be seen much because as I said at the time, my identity had become so wrapped up in my work that when people looked at me, they weren't seeing me, they were seeing her. And it was like killing off a main character, the whole old Taylor is dead kind of thing. And so I knew that people were going to sort of have that question of like, well, who are you now? And I didn't have the answer because I had to go and rediscover things that I hadn't been allowed to have for a long time. My career had not allowed me to have strong opinions. I didn't know what it was like to express opinions. I had to sort of rediscover that. I didn't know my own sense of style because I had been told your jewelry is too loud. You need to wear quieter jewelry. You need to wear, and I had developed this visual identity that was not mine. Right. And so to redevelop that was joyful, and ultimately privacy is where I found my joy, not in posting and asking for feedback and getting that sort of endorphin rush or that dopamine hit, but ultimately just really immersing myself in privacy and allowing myself to just being like, whoever you are, can't wait to see you again, come back on out, it's safe. And I created the safest environment I could for me to reemerge. And it was like looking in a mirror and seeing no reflection. Mm-hmm. So I looked at my husband and I said, you know me. My husband and I have known each other since I was 16. So I said, you know me. I'm going to rely on you to help me gauge where I stand, who I am, and recalibrate to me. I turned to tools like I had my disc profile done. I did Clifton Strengths Finder. These things give you language to articulate who you are without it being defined by the job you're doing, but more so the way you approach work, the way you approach communication. And so that's where I just started to piece back together that sense of identity. And then once I did, I never put pressure on myself to have to explain it to the world. I think as mothers in particular, there's this motherhood becomes a performative art.
Yes.
In this culture, there's a lot of, and there's nothing wrong if that's comfortable and that's good for you. But I think it's okay to say, I want to parent in private.
Absolutely. And I think I want to go back to a word you used, because I think so many of us millennials and young moms and young dads are caught up in that I have to be a great parent. I have to be really good at my job. Again, that have it all mentality. Mm-hmm. And when you're in it and you feel that, what you use the word burnout. When did you know, like, I am burnt out? I mean, I know you've talked about the steps, but really, truly, like, what were some of the signs that people might be listening to this and think, yeah, I feel that?
So one of the things that happened was if anyone gave me a compliment, it felt almost hostile. And I knew that was not what they were trying to do. But I looked at it as, well, what do you know? I started to have this, well, what do you know? You don't even know me. Feeling when people talk to me. It felt like this sense. And then also I just felt hollow. I was being externally praised, but internally numb. Nothing felt worth it. These successes I had built started to feel really empty to me. And then what's the point of life if it's not joyful and if it's not fulfilling and doesn't feel impactful? It looks like let someone else have this spot. I'm going to go find where that joy and that impact and that richness is for me again. But it really, and then it got to a point, and I waited far too long, but it got to a point where I would pull into work and I started to physically shut down. I would start panic breathing. I would cry in my car, getting out to go into the building. And I knew in my head, like, this doesn't make any sense. I've got a great job. I'm comfortable. I'm not out digging ditches in the rain right now. Like, I'm in a safe and comfortable place, but it just wasn't what that incongruency between who I was and what I was having to be just wasn't there for me. And, I'm a performer. I came from theater, and when you're performing a role on stage, when the show ends, no one expects you to be the character anymore. They get it. And so when I got into being on camera and in news, I took very seriously my commitment to journalism. I worked overtime to make sure that I was meeting the expectations and earning the respect of people around me. But then when I would leave the building, the performance side, people thought that was me. And it was, but it also wasn't the full me. And so they started to drift so far apart. And I think, and my therapist talked about this. She said, one of my values is privacy. Being a public figure doesn't fit with that. One of them is excellence. Being in an industry where they're, cutting costs and taking resources away didn't align with my belief in what excellence is supposed to look like and what support for excellence is supposed to look like. And then family. Being away from my kids, and my kids sit talking to me like, well, you're never around. Nothing was lining up with my values. Everyone's values are going to be totally different. But that alignment, I think, is where joy comes from. And you can be so much happier when you have it.
And so what benefits do you think others can take away from making a major decision and walking away?
It gave me my life back, if that makes sense. Quite literally, you get to a point where you're just like, what am I doing this for? And when you give yourself the grace to say, look, I don't know what you're going to be, but I'd rather be nothing than be miserable. That I just wanted to be not miserable. The fact that things have gone so well has been great. But I think you just cannot underestimate how much happier you will be when you build your life and your boundaries around your values. Boundaries don't feel uncomfortable if they're in line with who you are and they represent what you stand for. And everyone's answer to what you stand for is going to be different. That's what makes it's so important to have lots of different types of friends and people who are able to be like, I can help you build this boundary because that's an easy one for me. That was really important. But I think walking away, you do not have to curate vulnerability. You do not have to pretend to have the answer or post some, we are so encouraged to document our life and justify our choices. And you don't owe anyone that explanation short of maybe your spouse, because they are sort of a direct stakeholder in your life. But even my parents said, if this doesn't make sense to them, I don't owe them their comfort with my decision. I just owe them clarity on what it is. And I don't have to help everyone. I don't have to light myself on fire anymore to keep everyone warm.
I love that. You used a term, curated vulnerability. What does that mean to you?
So when I left news, when I left my career, one of the first things I did was delete all of my social media and gave myself permission to not feel the need to have an audience for my life for a little while. And I didn't know how long I would keep that up. I certainly just knew for now I needed to take a break. I've never gone back. Occasionally I'll peek, but I have not posted. I just don't engage because when I'm out with my kids, I want to wear and dress and be either what they need me to be or what I want to be or what the situation needs, not pretending to be a little supermodel, which I feel like we're all under pressure to sort of make it look good or make it look easy. And so that was, I think there's this, we are never fully honest. I worked very closely with mental health and suicide prevention in the work that I did right after I left news. And there is this stigma around admitting that you're not okay because people start to walk on eggshells around you. And I had that happen the first time I saw some former coworkers where someone literally said, I don't want to trigger anything. You okay? Like they just really didn't even know how to talk to me.
Right.
And that's difficult. And there are going to be people who just don't make the shift with you. And that's okay. There's 7 billion people on Earth. You're going to meet a new one for that spot. And it doesn't make them a bad person. It's just that we're all walking very different journeys. And so I think there's this pressure to present as if you're being honest, but don't say something that might be problematic or don't say, you can't ever really share the full picture. So for me, getting rid of social media gave me the freedom to just be truly vulnerable around and with people who would support me or understand, and not for a sort of public audience where you have that random dude who's going to show up and take it somewhere where you're like, has nothing to do with me. Get out of my comments, get out of my, and you don't have to be a public figure for those people to show up on your page or in your accounts and add that pressure.
How are you now? Where are you at right now?
Great. I think I've become like the weird mom that I always wanted to be, because I don't have to justify any of it. And so I'm working. I've actually gone into consulting. My husband's business was doing great. And we've always talk about running towards something. My husband and I first met when I was 16, and we worked next to each other in communications. And so we've always known each other's work really well. We've always wanted to work together, but it was never the right time. Even when I left news, it wasn't the right time. And then the time finally came. So recently I joined him. Business has been booming. And I feel like, I think, is it the book The Alchemist? There's some books that kind of talk about the idea of beginner's luck, and that when you're on your right path, there are going to be things that just fall in your lap, and it won't keep being like that, but it's to make sure that you stay on what is ultimately the right path for you. And so based on how things are going, I think I'm on my path.
That's amazing. Kaitlin, truly, thank you. Thank you for sitting here and sharing your story. I know that's not always easy, but I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. And for any viewers who maybe are dealing with this moment where they say, I don't know how I can do this, I just want them to know that there are those of us on the other side who are 100% rooting for you, and who you don't have to go through this alone. When I picked a therapist, I picked a mother who was about my age, who also had made a career shift. I wanted someone who could sort of relate, but no one has to do this alone. And if you don't have that circle, those people, whether you shoot me a message, whether you find them, you don't have to do this alone. And there's a lot of us rooting for that change. And you get one life. God, like, it's just too weird that humans exist on a rock with nothing else around us for hundreds of billions of bajillions of years of space. Like, it's all just too strange not to make it a little more whimsical and magic for yourself. So do what you have to do to take care of yourself, take care of your family, but then find the magic that makes you feel happy. And it does not have to be logical to anyone but you and your immediate family.
And you're walking proof.
Like
you are absolutely proof. To see somebody that walked away from quote unquote having it all and coming out stronger and looking amazing.
And now I have what I wanted.
Exactly. So Kaitlin, mother of four and former Houston News anchor, thank you so much for joining me on Cold Coffee.
Thanks for having me.